Hi, this is Dr. Catherine Van Ossalt. This week, I'm going to be interviewing Dr. Marcia Ballinger, co-founder of Ballinger Leafblad, with over 20 years of experience in executive search. We'll find out a bit more about her life experiences and what wisdom she has to share. We'll talk about networking, maintaining professional and personal relationships, being an introvert, and being brave. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. I'm grateful that you're here. Dr. Marcia Ballinger, I am so thrilled to have a moment to speak with you. You are an incredibly accomplished individual and woman as well. You are the co-founder of Ballinger Leafblad, which is a St. Paul, Minneapolis-based executive search firm. You have over 20 years in the executive search industry. You are a frequent presenter to a variety of audiences on the topics of career transition and job search strategies. I am not even done because you have also been named the top woman in business by the Minneapolis-St. Paul Business Journal, a Real Power 50 by Minnesota Business Magazine, and 50 over 50 by AARP Minnesota, which I have to say is probably my favorite award that I heard that you have been recognized with. Thank you so much for coming and being here.
My pleasure.
You have authored some books that a couple of them are some of my personal favorites. You wrote the 20-minute networking meeting, which that book is incredible. I feel like it helped shape my level of professionalism, my ability to interact with others. It was just it's so well written that I really want to thank you for writing that. You've also written Make the Jump, Reinvent Your Career in the Nonprofit Sector. I have some questions for you about that as we move forward. And I personally got to spend some time with you when you served as the chair of Capella University. You were the board of director and I was the faculty representative. And I have to say, you still are one of the most impressive business individuals that I have ever had the honor of working with. I admire you so much because I felt like you beautifully balanced the keeping the momentum of moving forward and meeting the agenda and the mission of the overall organization so effectively. And yet you were always so kind and you helped mentor me personally. And when I reached out to you, I remember I was asking about, actually it was about interviewing for a job position and you gave me your time, which I don't know that there's anything more valuable than that. So thank you so much for coming here. I have many questions that I want to ask you about. I'm so curious about your expertise and again, grateful that you are here.
Oh, I'm delighted. Thank you. We both share a passion for higher ed. We share a passion for human development and relationships. I'm absolutely pleased and delighted.
Oh, thank you. I wanted to start off, actually, your book, Winning the Executive Interview. I know I talked about your other book. This book, I feel like it transcends the executive interview, although that's who it's targeted for. But I feel like anybody, even my teenage children, would benefit from reading through it because I feel like you are very gifted in articulating complex ideas in clearly accessible ways. I imagine that comes from your teaching background, quite honestly. So I love that book. And I'm so curious, how did you become passionate about the field of job transition and career planning? Like, how did this become your area of expertise?
Yeah, thank you for that. That's a really thoughtful way of thinking about it. I've been in the executive search industry for over 25 years, and executive search firms are hired typically by organizations when there is a critical role to be filled. And at a really transactional level, and certainly when you start in the profession, you're focused on recruiting candidates and interviewing candidates and assessing talent and presenting information and coordinating and things like that. But the further on you go, certainly, the last 10 years where I've been focused primarily on CEO transitions, there is significantly more sort of pre-understanding to that placement. And there's sort of post onboarding to assure a successful launch for a new C-suite leader. So before a CEO recruitment process would start, you might meet an entire board of directors. You might meet every single person on the leadership team. You might send surveys out to staff members at various locations. You might talk to donors or vendors. And so over the years, I think people who work in the executive search field do develop expertise and background in job transition, and that's significantly broader than searching or recruiting for a particular person. So I developed an affinity for that work. And when you are a person who says yes, which I typically do, people who call into the executive search firms that I've worked with or founded often have questions that are a little bit off the track. What should we do? We're really in a pickle. What should I do? I just lost my job. And I would always be the person that says, send those calls to me. So I've had the really great fortune over the years of understanding executive transition from a lot of different lenses: the hiring organization, the candidates themselves, the outgoing leader, the person taking the job to the marketplace. And after a fashion, I started realizing, certainly with networking, there was a day where I realized I hit 1,000 networking meetings, that over 1,000 people had called me or come into my office, and I'm probably 2,000 now. That was a sort of a stark realization of, how are these meetings going? Are they all really successful? And the truth is, many of them were not successful. And then I started watching, what did the people do who were networking really well and successfully? And that was the genesis for writing about networking, and a model that I found worked the best. Similarly with interviews, we, as an executive search firm, we interview candidates, of course, lots of those, maybe we're in the thousands there too, but we also sit in the back of the room and observe when our clients, who are the hiring organization, interview candidates. And then the candidate leaves the room. What are they saying about that person? Well, I was in the corner and I saw everything. So again, after many, many years of that, I started realizing that there were a lot of things related to interviews that weren't commonly shared or weren't commonly spoken about, or were, people walked around thinking there was maybe a secret trap door or something like that, a magic word. And I started watching, what did the people do who were compelling in those conversations? And I think the last thing I would say about both networking and interviewing is, there's no shame in not being good at either of those things. And as a matter of fact, nobody wants to be a professional interviewer. You don't want to be hopping around and interviewing so often that it's really a well-primed skill. You sort of want to be the person who says, I've been places for a long time. I've really thrived. I haven't had to interview a lot because past bosses have called me, or I've connected with people at a new organization. And so there's really no shame in feeling like this is a rare but life-changing conversation, right? And so to seek out a resource and read some tips that can help us do better with interviews or networking, which is a little bit more broad category of intentional career-related conversations, that's really a sign of strength, not a sign of weakness.
I think that's so beautiful to think about, that you don't want to really be interviewing a lot, and instead you want to be able to retain and learn and acquire new knowledge in a position before you then move on and pursue other jobs. So it's a nice way to think about. And then how do you access resources to get better and improve your skill set?
Right. A lot of people feel like, I don't want to be seen carrying around a book on networking, that it's hidden inside the folio or tucked inside the purse or something like that. But, when a person thinks about the totality of a career, there are moments where, and I'm talking more about broad networking now as opposed to interviewing for a job, but there are moments where I think to myself, I've got a big new project. I've never done anything like it, but I know people who have. Or I've been at my organization and we're starting to hear that the corporate headquarters will be moving out of state. Gosh, how should I start to prepare for that moment? My boss and I aren't getting along so well. Do people have advice for me on managing challenging relationships? I'm starting to think about maybe volunteering for a nonprofit. Which one should I think about and how should I connect? those are all moments in a person's career where we might want to tap into the wisdom of our network, a professional network, professional/personal network. And again, having comfort and confidence with those types of conversations has value over the course of a career.
Yeah, it's interesting because I'm not sure, but I wonder if historically there was shame or embarrassment around looking for books around parenting, for example. And nowadays, I feel like it's the first thing you get is how can you get better at this? And so, that pursuit of knowledge can help you in all ways, I guess. So thank you. I am curious. Yeah. Yeah. In your own journey, who mentored you? Like, do you feel like you gained all of your skills from all of those iterations of experiences that you had, or was there some strong mentor in your own life that stands out to you?
I think, I started my career in 1981 at IBM, and there were not many women at that time. It was not common for men to mentor young women. And as a matter of fact, the term mentorship, I didn't hear, for 20 years hence. So I think that mentorship was more catch as catch can. The people that you met that did share pearls of wisdom or spend a little extra time were very memorable. They're memorable encounters now, 40 some years later, but definitely not called mentorship. It was more, potentially I was a sponge and I was lucky enough to have somebody nearby with an affinity for sharing. But I think the term mentorship is more intentional. And people say, well, how do you know if you have a mentor? Because both of you have used the word mentor. Someone has said, would you be my mentor? And the other person says, yes, I would like to be your mentor. And whatever form and fashion it takes from there, whether it's over the phone, whether it's once a month having lunch, whatever the case might be, there's an understanding and an intentionality to mentorship. I can't say I've ever had that, but I've certainly had the opportunity to learn from many phenomenal folks.
Well, I appreciate that historical perspective because sometimes you don't even realize the different world that nowadays everyone talks about who is your mentor. And I also think that really speaks to the willingness to be open to hearing what other people have to share, the bi-directional relationship, but then also, I don't know, overtly saying, I would love to learn from you and asking for help.
I think that's a good point, and it's where perhaps the intersection is between networking and mentorship, in the sense that networking is best done when it is reciprocal, like you mentioned, and when the purpose of when networking is wisdom seeking versus favor obtaining, right? And so a mentor who is identified and we've got an intentional relationship and there's sort of a wisdom seeking component to it, that has a similarity to a networking meeting in the sense that the best networking meetings are around learning from the other person and honoring that learning, albeit mentoring would be an ongoing developmental, probably an accelerating type of relationship over time.
Right. Okay, so I'm going to pivot the conversation a tiny bit because it makes me think about when I look at your news feeds, because obviously I adore you. I am so struck by the amount of images that you post, not only of your professional successes, but honestly of the personal connections and relationships. So you post images of you with friends out at celebrating someone's birthday, or you out with your girlfriends. And so I would love to hear some of your thoughts around how you foster friendships as well, especially as you think about in today's culture, a lot of people feel quite lonely. People feel, especially Gen Z, millennials, feel disconnected from others. So what are some of your thoughts and insights about how to feel like you belong and that you have value?
Yeah, thank you for that. I'm probably sort of the Facebook generation for sure. And in my line of work, we work exclusively recruiting heads of nonprofits. So there's no shortage of opportunity to be out in the community, and there's great joy in that. So there's a personal/professional connection there too. But I also think that across, sort of acquaintanceship all the way to direct to deep friendship, there's a continuum. And I think that people should, I think that people can be open and respectful and value relationship in whatever version they come. We all have relationships that are rare and occasional, but bring great delight, right?
Right.
And that's okay, right? I'm close to 19,000 connections on LinkedIn. And, how many of those do I know extremely well? Maybe 1,000, right? 18,000 are people I'm connected to on LinkedIn. And, my relationship with them is seeing the odd post and finding it interesting what they're doing in their organization, or seeing something that they think is important. Maybe there's the occasional message. And I'm super happy with those relationships. Others, I'm going to, talk to, okay, some people I'm going to only have a virtual relationship with. I have one friend, and my business partner is in his mid 40s, and he absolutely thinks this is hysterical. I have one business friend, and she will send me an email to set up a phone call. And I get an email, and we said, when should we set up a 45-minute phone call? We're mid 60s plus, and we're more than happy to have a 45-minute phone call that we schedule via email. He can't imagine anything more ridiculous.
I love it.
All the way down the continuum, all to, the person that I talk to on the phone, the person, and then you've got friends that you always see in person. It would be weird if they called you on the phone. And those are people that, are more likely to see in person. So I think, to your question, we can value relationships for what they are and see the goodness if they are rare, or if they are occasional, or if they are virtual, or if they are frequent, or if they change. And I love the fluidity that exists in all of those types of relationships.
I am so struck by that, because my takeaways are really around reducing almost judgment around what does this relationship mean, or expectations around what does this relationship mean, and instead just giving yourself a little bit of grace and your friend a little bit of grace to say, this is the joy that I get from this relationship, and it doesn't have to look some way, or if you strip away that comparison, I guess, that then you can just enjoy the friendship for what it is, whether it's a texting or a Snapchat or, an actual voice phone call or an in-person get together. So I really like that it's just kind of like enjoying the friendship for what it is.
And I think, all of us are going to have a balance. Mine is obviously heavy on the transactional LinkedIn connection side. And I own it, right? I own that if somebody fairly randomly wants to link with me, and if they're, my criteria are fairly thin. If they are living in my state, I'll accept the link. If they are, in a job transition, I'll accept the link. If they look like they're in a connected industry, I'll accept the link. My husband, on the other hand, if someone wants to link with them, his response is to send back a message that says, I'm not sure we've met. How may I help you? And I would never do that. That sort of seems, rude almost. But he did that once, and someone wrote back, well, I'm connecting with you because of this background, and they ended up doing a consulting project together. So he's got his style, but he owns it. He's more of a curator of those relationships, and I've got my style. And yeah, it's almost like we all have different appearance characteristics, and we all have sort of stylistic friendship characteristics.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. What What are your thoughts about this? Is kind of a pivot, but it's not too, I think it still flows. What are your thoughts about forging new organizational relationships?
Oh, you know what? That's a great question. And I think today, because we have so much more access to connect with each other, we're not as separated work relationships to outside of work relationships. And, you think back sort of pre-internet, right? Pre-internet, pre-cell phone. When you left work, you weren't really texting someone and you weren't sort of crossing that divide frequently. And today we have so much more opportunity to meet people in a professional sense at a conference, at an activity, at the office, and, connect off hours, if you will, if there are any such thing as off hours. And relationships can and are personalized in a way that was significantly more difficult years ago. I think that's a good thing. And I can point to many relationships that started out professionally, and you discover a shared interest or a shared hobby, and the next thing you know, you're having a cup of coffee, and the next thing you know, you're having lunch, and the next thing you know, it's getting together on the weekend with spouses. And that does happen because we have so many more opportunities, and we can know each other and learn more about each other more quickly today.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really true. Especially if you want to follow somebody, you can find out a lot about them and their interests.
Yes, that's exactly right.
Yeah. Thank you. What are your thoughts about rekindling old relationships?
You know what? I feel like more of us should rekindle more.
Aw.
And I
Aw.
don't think there's anything, wrong with, and this comes back to networking. How do I approach someone with this ask, right? The ask is, I'm in between jobs, and I sure hope this person has some wisdom to help me think about things, or, potentially it could lead to some suggested opportunities, etc. So I've got this particular ask, and there's no reason not to call someone that I haven't spoken with in 15 years
Mm-hmm.
and be super upfront about it. I haven't talked to you, Catherine, in 15 years. I can't believe it. And you know what? There are ways to do that. I can say, I've sure enjoyed watching your children grow up on Facebook, or I've sure enjoyed seeing your career blossom on LinkedIn. I've read about all of your considerable successes academically. Boy, it would sure be fun to reconnect, learn a little bit more, and approaching it with honor and respect. I honor what you've done. I respect. I'd love to learn about, would love to reconnect. And, much of the time, and particularly if I add in the personal element, and many people, when they think about networking, they think, oh my goodness, all I'm going to reference is professional. I see that you are on the board of the Red Cross, and I would like to join that board. Will you meet with me? How much better to say, I was referred to you by my friend Catherine. I see that you're on the board of the Red Cross. I'd love to learn more about your experiences. I so respect that organization. I also see on your LinkedIn that you're very active in youth soccer. I am also. I see on your LinkedIn that we are both alumni of the University of Chicago. I see that you're very active in the Chamber of Commerce, and I've started attending Chamber of Commerce also. I see that XXXX. So, just to take that relationship a little bit further, deeper from the start, to sort of re-engage, is always a wise idea, whether it's somebody that I'm calling again after 15 years that I knew well, or maybe it's somebody that I knew 15 years ago and it's thin and they may not recognize my name, right? And that happens sometimes too. But I'm never, ever reluctant to do that. And if I do feel in my gut a sense of reluctance, then I'm that much more likely to include personal connections. I see that we've both been active in Team Women organization. I see that we're both fans of this sports team, whatever it might be, to make some of that glue before we get started.
Yeah. I like that it is about building the connection and I don't know, valuing that person as a whole person as well. Instead of just going in with what do I want out of this? It just feels more, oh, maybe we can rekindle a fun memory, for example, or a fun connection.
You know what? You are exactly right. And most people find great joy. They find great joy in having a robust set of connections in their career and don't have the time to do it. And so when someone pops up after 15 years, how wonderful is that? Let's reconnect. Let's hear about perhaps some of the other things that colleagues have done. And let's re-envision some of the work that we did together and hear about what we're doing since. And when that happens, most people are very glad. Life has us spinning a lot of plates. And, sometimes our career networking plates drop. And when someone restarts that spinning, that's almost always well received.
Nice. I love that metaphor. Thank you. What do you think about introverts building a professional network? I wonder if that actually just sort of speaks to the same skill sets and ideas that you just shared, honestly.
It is a thing, right? And there are specific books written on networking for introverts because people may have a reluctance to network if they define networking as talking a lot or bragging or needing to be aggressive or assertive or blustery or salesy or backslapping. All of those things, honestly, they are not any part of networking. Networking is about respecting and wisdom seeking and honoring and being in a mutual conversation. You've read the 20-minute networking meeting, and as mentioned, once I realized I had hit the 1,000 networking meeting mark, I started watching what did the successful people do, that when they left my office, whatever was their ask, would I forward their resume? Would I recommend them for a board? Would I help them think about a vendor that might work for them? Whatever it might be. When they left my office, who were the people that I felt inclined to recommend a week later when they weren't there? And so that helped me watch what did these people do really well and chunk out how should a networking individual plan out and manage the networking meeting. If you remember, in the 20-minute networking meeting, which I realize is a provocatively short amount of time, it takes a lot of skill to squeeze a networking meeting at 20 minutes. I get that. Many are well done at a half hour. But under any circumstance, the amount of time that is allowed for a person to talk about themselves in a networking meeting, if you'll recall, is 1 minute. And the reason that it's 1 minute is I rounded up. Honestly, I must have done a practice of 100 narratives, and I'm timing, what would I say in this instance? What would a person say in this instance? And I timed, and I did all these different scenarios, and it was almost always around 30 seconds. But I thought that's ridiculous in granularity. So I rounded up to 1 minute for you to talk about yourself. If I'm networking because I am thinking about a career change, what do I really need to say about myself when I'm seeking wisdom from someone else's extensive background? And if I've sort of set up the meeting correctly, I've probably sent them a gracious email. And when I confirm it the night before, I maybe sent my resume or a bio or a board bio or something like that. So they've got my background. What I need to do is set context. And in about 30 seconds, I can say, I'm really interested in learning how you moved from being a chief financial officer in manufacturing to healthcare. I'm considering that move myself because I started out my career as a nurse before I got into finance. And so I'd love to ask you a little bit about that. How much do you really need to say about yourself? And when introverts hear that, ooh, that's a relief. You do not have to talk about yourself. As a matter of fact, you shouldn't talk about yourself very much. You're setting context for the conversation. And that's a great relief to a lot of introverts who mistakenly think that it's about persuasion or self-promotion when it is not. It's about information seeking from someone that you respect.
Again, I think that gets back to the intention of the purpose of being there. And the intention is to really learn and absorb,
Yeah.
and that takes the pressure off. I have a question that I think will kind of tie together two concepts, because again, in a lot of your posts and what you promote is that value around family and ensuring that every child has a good home life. I know that that's a passion for you. And I wonder, or I'm taking the leap to connect that I'd like to also hear about your experience serving on boards specifically for nonprofit organizations and what you have garnished from that experience, or how that has shaped you as an individual.
Yeah, thank you for that, Catherine. I think one of the great gifts from my work in executive search over the last several years is with a focus on the nonprofit industry. I've had the chance to work with so many client organizations and learn a bit about what it means to be a small children's science museum or a foundation serving a large rural geography or a YWCA chapter or a bar association or whatever it might be. The landscape of nonprofits in a lot of communities is extremely rich. And that's a great learning that I've had the opportunity to see upfront. I've done searches for large healthcare organizations that are, the region's teaching hospital system for the CEO. And at the same time, I was doing a search for the first employee of a nonprofit that was being founded to place Black male educators at elementary schools, because it's so important that young Black men see themselves in their teachers, and historically they have not. That organization called Black Men Teach, I was recruiting the first staff member to be the CEO. Oh. And, at the same time working on this large healthcare system, recruiting all over the country. Well, what a great gift to see these two different organizations and how each and all of my clients really were thinking about their work. So it's almost like letting a kid into a candy store with $5 in their hand. It's almost overwhelming the riches, right? So that has led me to be able to serve on nonprofit boards. Sometimes they are clients that I've worked with. Sometimes they are organizations that I've heard of or learned of, through my work at nonprofits. And you and I share a lot of passions. You and I share a passion for education. You and I share a passion for human development. You and I share a passion for access to high quality education. And some of my other passions are needs that are very straightforward. Housing, families for children that wait in the system, food insecurity, those types of things. So that has informed some of the boards that I've served on over the years. And, working with you on a board, you were phenomenal as a board member. And, working together to solve problems and working together to advance a mission is a sort of heady and powerful experience. So there's so much, that we as board members take from those rich experiences.
Well, and I would think that within the nonprofit sector, it's also about addressing complex problems and getting joy out of finding solutions. Like, what actionable steps are we going to take to be able to address this one example? male Black teachers in elementary schools, for example. So
Yes,
it's enriching. It's enriching in a different way, like maybe at a soul level.
it is. And I think that service for anyone who has any connection to nonprofit is related to the soul. And sometimes the service is direct service. It is going to the Humane Society and taking the dogs out for a walk, or it's serving on the board of the Humane Society and maybe everything in between. It could be fundraising, it could be helping with programs, it could be bringing in supplies. And sometimes it connects to networking because learning about various opportunities is something that's out there to be learned from the people that are in our circle. Most of us don't have access to figure out where we could place ourselves to make an impact and also to be enriching for us. But my answer to that question is usually your network knows. If I were to have 10 conversations and with 10 people who I admire who are active in the community, and I were to say, here, me, here are some of the things that I'm interested in, here are some of the things I'm passionate about. Where do you think I could plug in? Where could you see me making an impact? 10 people would probably give me a pretty rich set of things to consider.
I love that. You're right. Others know us very well.
Yes. And sometimes I do say to folks, I think you're 40 cups of coffee away from your next perfect thing. Somebody else might only be 20 cups of coffee away. We're all so many cups of coffee away from whatever it is that's on our mind or the intention that we have.
It makes me think of the game about Kevin Bacon, how many iterations, how many actors apart. Thank you very much. I want to congratulate you. I know that your search firm is celebrating its 10th anniversary. So congratulations to that hard work. And I think it speaks to the positive impact that you have made for others. I am very curious because this connects to what you said earlier about your gut instincts, right? And I feel like sometimes it's hard to distinguish between, is that a cautionary gut response and I need to listen to that, or is that just fear and I want to move through the fear to have the successful outcome that I'm looking for? And so with your success, I'm super curious at what point, when did you know you were going to be so successful? When did you realize that you were able to achieve your vision and then you did it? Because I think that's hard to do in and of itself. And as a woman, I think that there's another layer there as well. So I didn't mean to make my question seem so long, but hopefully I stayed clear.
Yeah, there are two pieces to the question, and I want to respect both of them. I do think, and certainly I see, women have often higher bar set for themselves, and women, we in the executive search field, we know absolutely well that a woman won't apply for a job until she sees herself checking off 10 out of 10 items. And a man will happily apply when he checks off 6 or 7. That's an absolute fact. And so it is a thing. It is absolutely a thing that we need to be conscious of. A woman called me to network a few weeks ago, and I'll share this example just because I'm still sort of ruminating on it. And she wanted to share a bit about her narrative and what she was seeking in her next career opportunity. And that's terrific. And she had an elevator speech, if you will, where she said, I work in the healthcare field. I'm very patient oriented and I'm concerned with the patient experience. I want to assure that there's a collaboration and teamwork and organization so that patients have a very good outcome, and et cetera, et cetera. And I said, are you open to my feedback? She said, yes, I am open to your feedback. I said, my God, woman, you have 3,000 people report to you. And that narrative sounded like you were the receptionist. And a receptionist is a phenomenal career and it's very important, But I got to tell you, you got to lead with, I am the senior vice president. I sit on the CEO's team. I have 3,000 people in 5 locations. I set strategy. I oversee this, that, and the other. And because I have to tell you, that's what the men are saying. And if you are not with the same people in the same sort of spheres, your narrative has to give that person enough to see you in the space where you fit in for your next opportunity, which was a SVP of a large healthcare system. And that's just an example of sort of the reality that you mentioned, that sometimes as women, we have a little more reluctance, or we hold ourselves to a certain standard before we take a next step. And that doesn't go away necessarily. So all of your compliments and about, success and making it, I'm thinking, I don't know, who's she talking about? But you're very kind. I think, what I will say for absolute sure, the greatest joy in my career, and I founded 2 search firms, so I've worked with a number of phenomenal colleagues in those firms. But I can say that my greatest joy was seeing other partners in the firm that were following on, if you will, to me in my career. And I look at them, particularly my business partner, Lars Leifblad, but others too. And he's eclipsed me. And I can see that Lars has eclipsed me. He's extraordinary. And that is not a threatening feeling. That is an inexplicable joy to realize that your colleagues are growing and developing. And there's even yet other colleagues that are, coming up behind them. And the joy that there's continued development and collaboration amongst the team so people can keep thriving in their careers, for me, has been the best moments.
Ah, that's lovely. Thank you so much for speaking with me. I know you have another meeting. I have another question, but I think, do you have 4 minutes or not?
Sure.
Okay. Because I think that this speaks to your success, and this is off script. So I'm very curious, what compelled you to agree to meet with me on my fledgling project?
Oh, well, I think a couple of things. I guess my mantra is, what's the worst thing that can happen? I say that to my business partners. I say that to my daughter, my grown daughter. What's the worst thing that can happen? There's no worst thing. I'm going to have a great conversation with somebody I like and I admire, right? So that's all to the good. I think I liked your intention and your direction with the podcast. And you sent me a set of questions that showed that you had thoughtfully prepared for a conversation that had a value to it. So all of those things to me were really impressive. And I also love your bravery to step out and create a podcast in the first place.
Oh, thank you. I think that speaks to just the whole reason why I wanted to ask you, was because I see you as a force, and I see you as having a lot of wisdom to share. And your willingness to engage with me in this conversation almost just reinforces why I adore you so much and value you as a leader. So thank you so much for all that you have contributed to so many people.
My pleasure. And thank you also for asking. Many people have wisdom and many do not get asked. So thank you for thinking about how you can bring forward these various voices. I think it's extraordinary.
Yeah, more nuanced voices and experiences that everyone can benefit from. Oh, thank you so much, Marcia. I appreciate you. I know you have to go, and I value your time. Thank you so much. And I look forward to being able to share your wisdom with others.
Thank you, Catherine. It was great to talk to you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Until next time, thanks for listening to Wisdom Over Time. This is your host, Dr. Catherine Van Osselt, and please share this episode with whomever you think will get a little bit of joy from our conversation. Keeping connections is what life is all about.